Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of feedback on the quiz. In general, people did pretty well on this quiz, but there were a couple of problems that I saw multiple times, so I thought I would talk to you a little bit about them. So I asked you guys about the relationship between the population standard deviation and the sample standard deviation. So this is our PowerPoint that went with this first unit. And if you look here, we have the two formulas. This one is for the sample standard deviation, and this is for the population standard deviation. So if you compare them, you may notice they're almost exactly the same. This is like the sum of, or these are variances actually. So the standard deviation would be the square root of each. But for each one, you have sort of the deviation, or each score minus the mean. So the top is the same. What's different is the denominator in these equations. So notice that in this equation, the denominator is always going to be 1 less, which is going to make this a larger score than this. So the sample standard deviation should always be greater than the population standard deviation, assuming you're calculating it with these formulas. All right. Now, a sample standard deviation is actually an estimate of population deviation, standard deviation. So if we're working with a sample, we use this formula because that formula would underestimate it. All right. Okay, now the other thing I wanted to talk about is calculation of percentiles. So let's see here. We already went over how to do percentiles. Let's see. So you may remember there's like a step-by-step procedure here. Now, a lot of people, or most people got one of the questions where I just gave you a list of percentiles and I said, find the 45th percentile, or a list of data points, and I said, find the 45th percentile. Where people got hung up was in the dendrogamma question. So I ask you to find the 80th percentile of ventrals in dendrogamma. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to calculate it for diadema. So to make this a little easier to read, notice it's in column G here. What we're going to do, I'm just going to remove these other columns just so they're not in the way. And we'll just get just the ventrals for diadema in here by itself, just so you can see how to do this. Okay, so the nice thing about having it like this is we now can even count how many there are. So notice that there are basically 20 scores. So remember, the first step is we take the percentage we're interested in and we multiply it times the number of scores times plus 1, okay? So the first thing we're going to need, and I'll just do it in here, is we're going to be interested in 0.8, the 80th percentile, times 21. So that's the number of data points we have, times the percentile that we're interested in. So this is going to give us an integer portion and a fraction portion. All right. Okay, so now the next step is we would want to sort these. Okay, so we can just, actually it's possible to just select the numbers themselves. I'll do that so that the other thing stays in place. All right, and we go up here to data and then sort. All right, so now we've got them from highest to lowest. Right. So the next thing we do is we find data point that, or rank number 16. So we come down here and we find out where 16 is. And then we find that rank plus 1. So notice that the score for 17 is also 56. Okay, and so Then what we do then is we take, we use this formula where we take the 16th one, so 56, and then we add it to 80% of the difference between the two. However, notice the difference between the two is 0. 56 minus 56 is 0. So if you multiply that times this fraction portion, 0.8, it gives you 0. So the answer then is just 56. All right? So that's what happened with the dendrogama, and the same thing happened with each of the species. In every case, when you look for the 80th percentile, you had two numbers that were the same, and so that number just became the 80th percentile. All right. Now, the other question that people had trouble with on the quiz, I can actually show you while we're looking at the homework for this section. Okay, so let's see here. Here we go. Whoops, hold on. This is a key that I made up for the homework. And so what I want to do is take a look at each one of these graphs and sort of talk about some common mistakes that people made. All right. So here is the bar graph for the dendrogama data, and this actually relates to one of the multiple choice questions. So on one of the multiple choice questions, I ask you guys, what is the top of this bar? And quite a few people miss this. But the top of the bar, notice that's the mean. And so it's showing one standard deviation around the mean is overlapping the mean right at the top. So that's what the top of the bar is. That's the mean. That's different than what we have on box plots, where this line in the middle is the median rather than the mean. Okay. All right, now let me explain how I evaluated the homework. So for each graph, I just kind of came up with a list of the things that should be there, and I assigned point values to each one of them. All right. So for each graph, you had to have a caption. So here is our number of Goulers, the bar graph. Almost everybody got these captions correct. The important thing is you have to identify things that are missing from the bar chart. So in this, or aren't defined on the bar chart. So in this case, we have these whiskers here, and somebody looking at this isn't going to know what those are, because they could be standard error, they could be standard deviation, or maybe they could be something else, and those are the only two things I can think of. So you'd need to have something in here saying whiskers are one standard deviation for the mean. So for this first one, I would say something like comparisons of Gular scale counts and 3 species of dendrogama. All right. Now, then there are some style issues for these graphs. So when I made this, you got to remember you're supposed to be setting the font to Arial 12-point font, and then the title of each axis is supposed to be in title case. So notice we have capital letters here, except for, things like prepositions and other small words. Okay, let's see. Most people didn't have any trouble with this one. Now, on the bar chart, the box plot, you have a couple of extra things that you have to define. You have to define what that symbol is, and then we have to tell people how these percentiles were calculated, because there's multiple ways of doing it. On both these, there should be no frame. That was like another stylistic thing. You want to label, have a label for the axis, number of Goulers. Most people did that or had that. So then in the caption, we could say, the percentiles are calculated by interpolation. The sample for Dendrogama belongeri contains one near outlier represented by a hollow circle. Or you could put the circle in parentheses if you could make that little symbol. Some people did that. Okay. Now for the other one, so the third graph you had to make, you were going to sort of see if snout vent length was somehow correlated with height in the forest. All right. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking for a relationship between the height in the forest and the snout vent length. So you kind of look at these things, well, which of them is the dependent variable? So height in the forest is the dependent variable. We're trying to determine if it depends on snout vent length. In other words, we're kind of asking the question, do larger lizards prefer to be at a higher position in the forest? That's what this graph is showing. All right, now when you look at the graph that you generate, we want to be sure we have the dependent variable on the y-axis here. Now, if you look at the data, it doesn't go very high. I think like the highest score is only like 9 meters above ground. On some people's graphs, over here you have these numbers, like 10 to 90, meaning what they did, they may have labeled this correctly, but they actually entered the snout vent length data into the second column of the past spreadsheet, and that treats it as the y value. So the way past will read the data, the data in the first column is going to be treated as x values, and then the data in the second column are treated as y values. And then the third column, they're x values, and the fourth column, they're y values. So some people got the data mixed up, and so their graph is a little backwards. All right, so another important thing, you had to have the units in parentheses, and these are different units of measure. So it's very important to put meters over here and millimeters over here with snout vent length. Again, you needed to be sure that you have tidal case there. Now we have two different colors in this graph. There's black and red. So you needed to find out which one is which. There's different ways to do that. One way would be to just count all the dots, because there's 20 for diadema, but 24 for australis. Or you can just graph diadema by itself, and then you'll find out that this black line is the one for diadema. So in your caption, it needs to say that. A lot of people got these colors mixed up, or some people did, not a whole lot. So diadema are the black symbols in the way I've set this up. All right. What else would have been left off? I think those were the main things. So if you want, you can, compare your homework, if you still have this, with these graphs. When I was evaluating the homework in D2L, I entered feedback, sort of saying what was wrong with each graph. I think you guys should be able to access the feedback through D2L. All right, so one other thing, you're going to notice that I've added the grades, and let's see, this is what the grades are going to look like. So I enter the grades. I don't use D2L's grading, it's got a grade sheet in there, and I don't want to try and figure that thing out. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to periodically post your grades. And these are so you can find yours by looking at these codes over here on the left. If you click on this, you're going to see that the ID codes, it's basically your student ID, but the first letter has been replaced with a 1, and that's to make sure that this is totally anonymous. So, my first name is Michael, so I would have had an M here, but it would be replaced by a 1. Okay. So you'll find your quiz and homework grades in here for these first two assignments. All right, and with that, I will end this video.